The doors had been locked. The rooms were checked. But from the second floor of the house came the slow, unmistakable sound of footsteps that were measured, deliberate, moving from one end of the hallway to the other. No one was there. It wasn't the first time footsteps had been heard when the building was empty. It wasn't the first time doors were found open after being carefully shut. Amanda had heard from visitors and coworkers that this happened sometimes. That in a quiet certainty, there was the feeling that something or someone was moving through the house.
One day I walked into the kitchen space of the museum, and I just felt the most distinct feeling of someone walking right into my side and brushing my shoulder to the point that I almost kind of fell out of the way. And then it was followed by this smell of tobacco, and no one has smoked tobacco in the house for a very, very long time, but it was so distinct. It was like a man had just walked by me, and that's what he smelled like, and he was gone. And I remember thinking it was probably one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had at all in my life.
I'm Nadine Bailey, and this is Haunted Canada. Today, we're traveling to Aurelia, Ontario, to the tranquil lakeside property of one of Canada's most celebrated authors. On my journey, I'll be joined by Amanda Marino as she shares the home's darkest and most eerie secrets. This is the Leacock Museum National Historic Site. Before the museum, before the man, there was the land. The area now known as Aurelia has a long human history, shaped by indigenous communities, waterways, and trade routes. This land lies on the traditional territory of the Nishabe. It was originally inhabited by the Huron-Wendat and later by the Ojibwe people under the leadership of Chief William Yellowhead. The first known European to pass through the area was Samuel de Champlain, who traveled the waterways in 1615 during his fur trade expeditions. In the 1830s, the British colonized the area and relocated the Ojibwe to what is now Rama First Nation. The growing settlement between Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching became an important stop along transportation corridors as sawmills and boatyards lined the shores. Its name is widely believed to come from the Spanish word orilla, meaning shore, and is credited to Sir Peregrine Maitland, who was Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada from 1818 to 1828. Aurelia became a village in 1867 and a town in 1875, and eventually achieved city status because it was an important economic hub, particularly in lumber, shipping, and manufacturing. By then, Andrew Tate, president of the Huntsville Lumber Company, was well on his way to becoming a millionaire, which meant that by the late 19th century, Aurelia was thriving. It even had an opera house. And because Toronto was not far away, a railway was built to connect it to Georgian Bay, which helped Aurelia become a fashionable summer resort. Old Brewery Bay, where the Leacock House stands today, was once on the edge of town. It was quiet, removed, a place where summer homes could exist without the noise of industry or crowds. Here, time moved slowly. The lake set the rhythm of the day. The house was quiet enough for Stephen Leacock to think, to write, to sit alone with his thoughts.
So Stephen Leacock, we talk about him and we call him the grandfather of Canadian humor, and that is because at one point he was actually the most famous humorist in not only Canada but the entire world. And he was actually, there was a quote that went around that said that Stephen Leacock was more famous, the name was more famous than Canada itself. He was friends with all kinds of very influential people like Mary Pickford, or America's sweetheart, even though she was Canadian, Charlie Chaplin, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who actually was inspired by Stephen Leacock himself. And he would have people like this over to his house here in Orillia, or where he spent his years over at McGill University. And he would be friends with these type of people, but he was even more famous than they were at the time.
That's Amanda Marino, the Experienced Development Officer at Leacock Museum. She said that Stephen Leacock's summer home in Orillia gave him a place to escape, to get away from the hustle and the bustle of life back in Montreal. He was born on December 30th, 1869, in Swanmore, Hampshire, England, and would have been a third of 11 children of Walter Peter and Agnes Leacock. When Stephen was 6 years old, the family immigrated to Canada and settled on a farm near Sutton, Ontario, along the shores of Lake Simcoe. His early life was not easy. His father struggled financially, and they had to rely on financial help from family members. Despite those hardships, whenever he could, he would be found near the water, enjoying time with his family.
Stephen and his family had a big love for the waterfront, and they would be on boats all the time. They'd always be on the water, and that's kind of how he came across what he termed Old Brewery Bay.
Leacock's grandfather, who was financially well off, sent him to Upper Canada College in Toronto, an elite private school also attended by his older brothers. Stephen excelled academically and was named head boy. He graduated in 1887, only to return home and discover that his father, struggling with alcoholism, had abandoned the family. That same year, at just 17 years old, Leacock began his studies at the University of Toronto. Although he received a scholarship for his first year, financial hardship forced him to leave university. He became a schoolteacher, a profession he famously disliked, but eventually returned to Upper Canada College to teach while completing his degree as a part-time student. At around this time, he met the love of his life, Beatrix Hamilton. While Stephen was a schoolteacher with limited means, Beatrix came from a prominent and wealthy family. She was the niece of Sir Henry Pellant, the builder of Toronto's Casa Loma, and she was accustomed to a refined lifestyle. The two met in 1899 during a tennis match at Southwood, her grandfather's estate. It was said to be love at first sight. Beatrix was strikingly beautiful, with long dark curls, and enjoyed a successful acting career. Despite Stephen's lack of social standing, he proposed, and Beatrice accepted. In 1891, Leacock earned his degree, and during this period, his earliest writings were published in the Varsity, the university's newspaper. He went on to study at the University of Toronto and later earned a doctorate from the University of Chicago. In the meantime, Stephen and Beatrix got married in New York in August of 1900 at the Church of Transfiguration, also known as the Church Around the Corner, located between Madison and Fifth Avenues. While he worked on his PhD, he joined McGill University as a lecturer in political economy, and the couple relocated to Montreal. However, in the summers, he would visit his mother, and on April 15, 1908, Stephen Leacock bought 19.73 acres on Lake Couchiching for $1,600 and named the property the Old Brewery Bay.
Well, Old Brewery Bay comes from when he found the property, there was nobody on it, but there was remnants of an old brewery. And that was actually one of the first breweries in Orillia. And it serviced the first men that kind of helped to build the town of Orillia. And so when he found it, he was a lover of alcohol, all things alcohol. He called it Old Brewery Bay because of that. He found it by sailboat. At first, when he was staying on the property with his wife, he would stay in tents before they had built any structures here. And eventually they built a small cookhouse on the property. And then over time, they just kept building onto that cookhouse. And, they need a new room or somewhere for someone to stay, they build a new room onto it. And it just kind of ended up looking somewhat like a train. And it's just, you'd have to enter one side to get all the way to the other side. It's just kind of thrown together. And it wasn't the most comfortable of living, though it was a cottage.
It was never meant to be grand. It was practical for those wanting a place to escape the heat, sit by the water, to slow down. He was not looking for grandeur. He was looking for distance. Leacock spent most of the year in Montreal, surrounded by lectures, deadlines, and the expectations that came with public success. This little house in Aurelia offered something different. By profession, Leacock was a political economist. He spent most of his career teaching, but Amanda says it was his writing and his humor that made him famous.
Exactly. At one time, he was a pretty well-known household name, whereas nowadays you might not recognize his name anymore, but he was a big deal back then. He was primarily a humor author, although he was also a political scientist and economist. That's where he started off his career, and it kind of started going into more of the humor side of things. It's said that when he was teaching at McGill University, his students would often walk past him in the hallways and he'd be cracking jokes at them, and they started to tell him he should start writing this stuff down, and he took their advice and started writing for different magazines and different periodicals. Eventually began to publish those articles within book format, and his first humor book was published in 1910.
Originally published by the Gazette Printing Company in Montreal, the book was titled Literary Lapses, and it marked his debut collection of comedic skits and stories, including My Financial Career, Society Chit-Chat, and Self-Made Man. It was an instant critical and popular success and helped launch his career as a writer, and Amanda says his writing is what helped him expand his summer cottage into something more permanent.
Leacock's mother, Agnes, was getting older and older, but she wanted to come and visit Leacock here on the property all the time. And so Leacock's wife, Beatrix, who he loved very much, convinced him that they needed a real home here on the property, and he had made enough money through all of his books that they could finally afford something luxurious as they built here. It's such a beautiful piece of land with a beautiful view. He did build a boathouse on the property. One of the first things that he needed was a boathouse. And it's just the most magnificent view from the boathouse. It's blue waters. It's very shallow. You just see so much of a different world when you look out on the water there.
His first humor book was published in 1910, but it would be Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town, published in 1912, that would be his most successful. It's a series of 12 humorous, interconnected sketches that offer an affectionate, satirical portrait of life in the fictional, small Ontario town of Mariposa, modeled on Aurelia, Ontario in the early 20th century. The stories revolve around the day-to-day lives of the town's eccentric inhabitants, highlighting their foibles and self-importance. It would become his masterpiece, making him one of Canada's most widely read authors. But his success wouldn't be without grief. In 1915, Stephen and Beatrix welcomed their only child, a son named Stephen Leacock Jr. He was born with a growth hormone deficiency and stopped growing at around 9 years old, maintaining the appearance of a child for the rest of his life.
So they tried for a long time to have children, and eventually they were so happy to find out that Beatrix was pregnant. She was actually 36 at the time, so she was quite a little bit more advanced to be having a child back then. It was a difficult pregnancy, a difficult delivery. And Stevie Jr. was born, everything seemed all right, but over time, Stevie started to show signs that he wasn't growing at the same rate as other children had been, or were supposed to be growing. So over time, they realized that he did have an issue with the growth hormone, but at the time, they weren't sure what it was. It took a lot of trial and error to try and get him to keep growing. And so what happened with him was that he never really kept growing past the age of 10.
At around the same time, Leacock's literary career exploded. Between books, columns, lectures, and university textbooks, he became a very wealthy man. By now, construction on the new two-story arts and craftsman's cottage had begun.
So when you first come to the property, there's quite a few different houses on the kind of area. You'll see the boathouse ahead of you. On the left side, we have what's called Swanmore Hall, named after where he was born. But that is mainly now a restaurant and kind of our storage facilities for our artifacts. And then on the other side of the parking lot is the big mansion, or the summer home of Stephen Leacock. And that is a beautiful, when you walk up to it, it's stately. It's amazing. It's got these great big archways off the porch. And then when you head into the house, you'll see it's all this beautiful Douglas fir. And it just is, it's magnificent. It was built in 1928. So the design is different in every room, and you could tell it was a hand built. It's, some rooms have a little bit of a slant to them, and it's very unique in that way. But it is 19 rooms large, which is quite interesting, and 9 fireplaces, complete with a billiards room in the basement and a wine cellar, which we just reopened to the public last year. And then there's tons of different spaces throughout, and the majority of the museum is kind of dedicated to Stephen's life and how he would have lived here. So we have a lot of the same furniture that he owned at the time, and anything that was missing when it became a museum has been recreated or brought into something that's of the time that looks very similar. And then some of the rooms that we have in the museum are kind of dedicated towards more different topics, various topics related to Canadian literature, perhaps the 1920s when the house was built, or different topics that keep bringing people back to see something new. What's interesting is that he also wrote textbooks for his studies in political science, and he was obviously teaching these topics as well. So his textbook actually was the reason why he made the most money. It sold for years and years, and students were purchasing it. So that was probably the way that he ended up by being able to purchase the property and build such a stately home. Unfortunately, though, Beatrix did pass away before the house was finished being built, and so she never got to see the home. So we do have it's quite a sad story. She died of breast cancer, and she was only 46 years old at the time, and they did have one son. His name was Stevie Jr., and he had a lot of issues on his own, but he did lose his mother when he was only 10 years old, too. So it's quite a tragic, sad story in that way, and we think it might lead to some of the kind of supernatural experiences we've had.
Beatrix died of breast cancer in 1925.
This was Stephen Leacock's favorite place in the entire world. He did find such peace being here. This is where he would spend his summer vacations when he would be off teaching at McGill. He wrote most of his stories here. And then he had his family here. Obviously, Beatrix found it amazing as well. This was her favorite place. They met in Aurelia. So it just held so much personal weight with Stephen. Such a lovely time in his life that he spent here. But then when Beatrix passed away, Stephen couldn't return to the house for a few years. It was so emotionally hard for him to be here. I think because so many happy memories took place here with her.
He continued to spend time at the cottage where he would write and remember their lives until his death.
So when Stephen Leacock Sr. passed away in 1944 of throat cancer, actually, his son Stevie did inherit the house. And eventually, the city did acquire the house when Stevie no longer wanted it anymore. And then it was a big drive to push it to be a museum because Stephen Leacock was so important to Canadian heritage and very highly thought of during the time. Even in the 1950s, people felt it was very important to preserve his life and his history here. Sir Henry Pellet kind of squandered away his family's fortune on the mansion and ended up bankrupting their family. And so Stephen and Stevie Jr. never actually received any money from that side of the family. So that was a big point of contention in Stephen Leacock's life towards the end of his life, where he really wanted to make sure Stevie Jr. would be cared for while he was gone. He was trying to make sure that some of that family money stayed in the family, and unfortunately it didn't. Stephen Leacock's family as well did not have a lot of money. They did start off, the Leacocks had quite the fortune. There was a Portuguese wine company, a port wine company called Leacock's Madeira, and their family acquired quite the fortune from that. But as it went down the family line, by the time it got to Stephen's generation, the money after that point was pretty much, nothing much left from that.
Unlike many historic homes, the Leacock Museum was not stripped down or modernized. Visitors often remark that it feels less like a museum and more like someone has simply stepped out for a moment. That sense of presence would soon become something more. Over the years, staff members and visitors began reporting strange experiences. Footsteps heard in empty hallways, doors found open after being securely shut, and Amanda experienced something that planted the seed that something, or should I say someone, was still living in the house.
So one of the first ones for me that kind of started me on this kind of asking people about their histories with the home and starting to think that maybe we should do something in the line of ghost walks and haunted experiences was one day I walked into the kitchen space of the museum and I just felt the most distinct feeling of someone walking right into my side and brushing my shoulder to the point that I almost kind of fell out of the way. And then it was followed by this smell of tobacco, and no one has smoked tobacco in the house for a very, very long time, but it was so distinct. It was like a man had just walked by me, and that's what he smelled like, and he was gone. And I remember thinking it was probably one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had at all in my life. And I went and told my coworker, and she had said that has happened before.
Amanda says the spirit that bumped into her isn't the only one still residing in the house.
When we talk about ghosts at the Leacock Museum, we often say there's probably two main spirits and kind of feelings you get while you're in the house. And one of them is kind of a prankster, jokey, kind of like a nice feeling when something happens. You just feel like someone's giggling in the corner, and you're like, oh, stop it. A door closes lightly. Or my favorite one was there's a door actually that leads to Stephen Leacock's bedroom down in the main floor level. And we do lots of temporary exhibits in that room. And so I was setting one up one day, and I was by myself in the house, and that door is one of the only ones that you have to unlock with a key inside the house. And so I was fiddling. I have a tendency to carry too many things at the same time when I first come into the museum. And so I'm carrying a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm trying to get the key into the lock. And I'm fiddling for so long trying to get the right key and trying to get it in. All of a sudden, the door just swings open. And it had been locked, and it was very strange. I hadn't even gotten the key into the lock yet. And so I kind of tend to see that as a friendly kind of experience. Here, just come in. You don't need your key. Whereas we've had a few experiences that seem more like a negative, kind of an angry kind of spirit. And we think that might be more attributed to Stevie Jr. So you can imagine being very bright and very talented, and he was great with the arts, and he was very educated, but being treated, looking young as he did, being treated as though he was a child by people that he both knew and didn't know very well. It had quite the effect on him, and I think that primarily was happening more so in Aurelia. And so he kind of had a lot of negative associations with Aurelia in that way, and the home.
Amanda said it's unclear if the spirit they believe to be Stevie Jr. is the same spirit that bumped into her. But she is certain she had one of the scariest experiences in the house while working in his bedroom.
So Stevie Jr.'s bedroom is on the very far end of the hallway, directly down the hallway from where my office is. So I'm always seeing that door open and close. It's probably the spookiest room of the house. And we decided it would be a good idea to install the spookiest exhibit we were going to have in a long time in the spookiest room of the house, which after we started installing, realized that was probably not a good idea. But so we started installing it, I'm putting things together, and this door is just opening and closing. There's no windows open. It's just opening and slamming and opening and slamming. So I just decided that's it. I'm going to close the door, and I'm going to put a toolbox in front of the door. Like, it's not going to open and close if there's a toolbox in front of it. And then it was like the force of a person, like, just literally pushed the entire toolbox. It's a heavy toolbox. Just like pushed it wide open. It like slammed against the wall.
There's another presence that isn't the silly prankster or the more violent and angry presence, and they're pretty sure it's Beatrix Leacock, who finally gets to enjoy the summer home she never got to live in.
One thing that people have reported seeing quite a bit is a woman walking through the sunroom area of the home. Now, the sunroom actually is an interesting story, too. As I said, Beatrix passed away before the house was finished being built, but she was a big part of why it was built and how it was built. She was actually part of the Casa Loma family. So Sir Henry Pellat, who built Casa Loma, was actually her uncle. So she was kind of used to the finer things in life as she grew up. And so when they were planning out this home that they would build, she had a lot of influence on what it would look like. And so that she really wanted a sunroom to be built on the house because she loved sunrooms. And so even though she had passed away, Stephen still made sure that her sunroom was built onto the house. And then to honor her, he always had it full of red geraniums, which were her favorite flower. And so people will report seeing this woman walk right through the sunroom, or maybe it's sometimes just a white curtain walk through. And then a couple of times people have mentioned that she's holding flowers, red flowers specifically. So we wonder if maybe she's kind of enjoying the sunroom that she never got to experience. So in that way, it's kind of a nice story, and we hope that she does get to be here. If the spiritual world does exist, we hope that she gets to, enjoy the space still.
Because staff and visitors have had such unique experiences, it became apparent to Amanda that she should gather these stories and build something unique with them.
We had past volunteers tell me about tours they had given and how things had gone haywire. I've experienced a lot of the things people have told me about. For example, there's a pool table, a billiards table in the basement, and staff used to actually work downstairs in the basement. That's where their offices were. They are no longer in the basement, thank goodness. But I would keep hearing this story about how the billiards balls would just keep smacking into each other. All of a sudden, the balls would all be spinning on the table, and you would hear them all the time. And I never experienced it until actually last year on a ghost walk night. When I was cleaning out, we serve hot chocolate, and I was cleaning out the hot chocolate maker in the sink next to the billiards room, and I just kept hearing them. And I was like, this is crazy. And I was like, I'm gonna go home now.
As the years have gone by, more and more visitors have experienced paranormal activity within the museum. Most often than not, they have heard sounds when there's no one around.
One that happened to me was that I was sitting here at my desk, and we had another staff member that was sitting behind me in this office. And we heard this woman's voice very distinctly say, hello. And so we thought someone walked into the museum, which isn't uncommon. There's so many doors, so it's it's not uncommon that like someone's cleaning something and it gets left open that day. So I go downstairs and I'm looking everywhere for somebody. I can't find anybody anywhere in the museum, and so I was very confused. And then so I went back upstairs, and then not like 10 minutes later, we hear the same like hello. And we all hear, like me and my coworker both hear it, and so we go downstairs and there's nobody around. And then we run into another volunteer who had just arrived, and we were like, oh, it was you. And she was like, nope, it wasn't me, but I heard it too. So we're all running around the museum like thinking somebody is there with us, like running around the house, and we don't know who they are. And then nothing, like there is nothing in the house. And then a few days later, we were here at night, and a completely different volunteer we know was walking around the house, and she heard someone say hello as well and came running up and like was freaking out.
However, the most frightening experience is when visitors are touched by an unseen hand.
I'd say one of the scariest ones for people was this feeling that they're being pushed down the stairs. And that one is a little bit spooky for me to hear. We do have the original staircase that goes down to the basement. And we don't use that staircase anymore because it's so steep. And we just have it blocked off and show it off as, this is the original staircase, and there's a new one that's been built down to the basement that we use daily. And so people will report, or have past staff members and past volunteers that have used that staircase will always report that they have felt like they're being pushed down those stairs. And so that one is a little spooky.
If being touched isn't scary enough, other staff have described the feeling of being watched and having the sensation of someone standing just behind them. For anyone who has felt it, the experiences are subtle, quiet, persistent. It's worth noting that Stephen Leacock and his family were deeply connected to this home. For Stephen, it was also a source of inspiration. He did not simply vacation here. The house bore witness to his joy, grief, creativity, and solitude as he birthed stories for the world to enjoy. His soul and that of his family are tethered to this lakefront location. So if hauntings are echoes of intense human experience, this house has plenty to draw from. Today, the summer home of Stephen Leacock stands as a National Historic Site and welcomes visitors from around the world. But at night, when Lake Couchiching goes dark and still, the Leacock house watches the water, just as it has for generations. Its rooms remain full of stories, and whether you believe the museum is haunted or not, one thing is for certain. This is a place shaped by a life lived deeply. And sometimes, when a place holds that much history, it doesn't empty easily. Thank you for joining me as we explored the ghost stories surrounding the Leacock Museum, and a special thank you to Amanda Marino, Experienced Development Officer, for taking the time to talk with me. I really do appreciate it. If you want to check out the Leacock Museum, I will link their website in the show notes. Haunted Canada is sponsored by the Edmonton Ghost Tours. I will link the website in the show notes. Haunted Canada is written and produced by me, Nadine Bailey, with senior producer Dila Velasquez. Production and sound design is by Rob Johnston, with help from Rosalind Kufer. If you'd like to support this podcast, please follow and share and tell a friend about the podcast. We would also appreciate a like and a 5-star written review. Also, you can follow me on our different social media platforms, including TikTok and my YouTube channel, Haunted Canada. Do you have a ghost story, haunting, or true crime about your house, a museum, or resort that you would like for us to cover on this podcast? If yes, you can email me through the website, hauntedcanada.com. Thank you from all of us at Haunted Canada and Curious Cast. Have a good night, everyone, and stay haunted.